presentation within the time allotted to me. First, I deal with the question of growth and well-being. Within that briefly. So I'm really to the main part of the agenda, the second part. That part I'll take up later and explain it. I'll start with this aspect of growth and well-being. First is that literally there's a misconception that growth is equal to well-being. People's welfare increases only with growth and development, the development agenda. That's incorrect. Because it doesn't necessarily take place, growth and well-being. In fact, I wrote an article from Jane called Growth Fundamentalism. Because everyone was saying that growth is the only criteria for the well-being of the people, getting relief from poverty, oppression, all that type of stuff. And there I explained that basically that's not so, because development and growth factor is based on consumer consumption. And if I if I fall sick, for example, and consume medicine, I am hospitalized, that will also be part of it. That nowhere is part of well-being. Also, all the black money which is pushed into the economy by the big corporates and this thing, which upmarket sales takes place. That's a major aspect of consumption expenditure today, not people's well-being. That also becomes part of the growth figure, the GDP growth figure. And so basically there's no link to the two. Yes, it's true that with a certain amount of growth in a particular structure, there can be better well-being. But that's not the case in the present state of affairs. And of course, where there is depression and contraction of the economy, there's a lot of impoverization. That is certainly there. So there's no real link between growth and well-being. It's a misnomer promoted again and again by the entire media, the mainstream media, by all the politicians, by all the economists, top economists. Of course, all the top economists are in Columbia University and come from there in America. But they are all promoting. Even when I got most irritated and jailed about, I saw 2-3 articles by that Chetan Bhagat writing on growth. As a sort of, he's not even an economist. But so everyone is promoting this misconception of growth and this thing being, and you see even the present dispensation, it's always development. If the development is destruction of the environment, the development is destruction of the economy, people's welfare. That's immaterial, but development, we are opposed to development, means you are opposed to growth. Basically, that's it. So, you see, you find that this agenda is being pushed into our mind again and again in various aspects. But if you see in real terms, development in the way it is being done today, or growth, destroys environment, destroys people's life, destroys basically every aspect of the country, of our nation. And we find that basically that really there's no real but it's a very strong misconception being promoted by the media, ruling classes, politicians, economists, top economists, and also certain aspects of the economy. So that's just as far as the introduction goes. Then as far as the second part, I just introduced that part. Remember the difference, one important difference between the 21st century today, that's the first 20 years, or even a little bit earlier, okay, from the new, is basically the introduction of the neoliberal form of the economy, basically. And everything is in reverse gear. Neoliberalism actually, I will come to that, I can introduce that now. Earlier, capitalism has two forms of existence. One is neoliberalism is to crush labor so that crush labor or disperse labor through its mode of capital. It's basically a form of fascism in a raw sense, if you look at it in economic terms, right from neoliberalism. It's what was the starting point of neoliberalism, you know? It was the Chilean massacre that took place by Allen D. That Roland Pinochet in 1973. The same year that the dollar crashed and gold standard was removed. Same year, Allende was assassinated, 30,000 people located in Chile, and the first experiment came. Actually, that experiment in Chile was conducted personally by Milton Friedman. He was the architect of that, and then afterwards, after the invasion, it came to neoliberalism by Reagan and Thatcher, whatever Reaganism and Thatcherism, and of course in India, from the mid-80s already it was coming in by when Reagan and Thatcher were brought. Of course, it was officially brought by in 81, 92 by Marxist and Marxist. So let's remember this period is a period of neoliberal, a form of, I won't call it fascism, but of crushing working class, crushing the oppressed people in order to extract surplus labor, surplus value by the corporates. Basically, that's the essence of neoliberalism, and which was brought in. And so it has an element of oppression, repression, right from the beginning. And of course, we have no communism there. That's another fact. Very little. But basically, that's the first introduction. Then global crisis and making of the 21st century. Global crisis. This is a very important subject set by Congress because it's a very serious sort of condition that's going to come up, which I'll try and explain, for which everyone needs to be prepared. It's going to be it's not going to be the normal type of life. It's already not the normal type of life, but it's going to be worse in the future, and I'll explain why. Now, crisis. Actually, as I said, Keynesian and then we come to the neoliberal. Keynesian had a series of cycles of crisis and boom, which is the normal life in capitalism. Now let's take the neoliberal period. The neoliberal period tried to set right the problems of the Keynesian period through increasing the exploitation and export of capital to China and other places where they started producing and cheap labor. And in that way they tried to cushion their crisis. But they did cushion the crisis. In fact, we find the first crisis after they adopted the Friedman's policies since, say, the severe crisis of 82. And that next major crisis came in 89, where the Japan bubble burst. Japan went into a recession of the type it's never had before. It's called the last decade after 89. And again it was repeated, the crisis was repeated in 1991. Again, throughout the 90s, large parts of the world were in a type of crisis never seen before, like Russia, for example. Russia's economy contracted on a level unheard of in the history of society. The East European countries, the third world countries, many of the Latin American countries, Argentina, Mexico, all these countries went into severe depression, all in the 90s. So, and then came in 2000 the dot-com bubble, which burst. The dot-com bubble really created such a psychosis that, there were people who had, when I was in Jharkhand, one Adivasi was telling me that they were preparing to, there was such a psychosis over the world that they thought the world is coming to an end. Actually, they said we were preparing peace and having peace because we said anyway we will all die in the first of the year. Such a atmosphere was created that even in a backward village, people were thinking like that, and there was the dot-com crash that came in 2001-2. And then came, of course, the Great Recession of 2008. The Great Recession, it's called the Great Recession, as opposed to the Great Depression of the 1930s. It is the biggest crisis of capitalism. So you just see the continuous crisis right up to the the Great Depression, whether it's Keynesian system or whether it's the neoliberal system. It's a continuous period of crisis and little growth, crisis and growth, and they have not been able to come out of it. Whether it's the Keynesian form or the neoliberal form, resulting in what was the Great Recession of 2009. I think you know about it, the Lehman Brothers crash, the subprime crisis where the American economy crashed, and they all had to be bailed out by the American government, and then they sort of, it took 18 months for them to recover. It was the worst crisis since the Great Depression of 1930s. It probably would have been even worse than 1930, but now they have a new system of cushioning crisis, which they are doing just now in the lockdown, also called quantitative easing and lowering interest rates. I mean, these are all terms. Quantitative easing is nothing but printing notes and increasing their debt, the government debt. That is that. So they pump in money to cushion the crisis, and because they pump in money, that is all in the form of debt, they have to reduce the interest rates. They reduce, even today the interest rates are around zero, even minus. In Japan and Europe, the interest rates have been minus for quite some time already, even before the pump driving the economy just now during lockdown. So just remember, we have to just, when we come to the present state, we have to see it in the framework of the past. Now you get the Great Depression. The Great Depression was followed by 10 years of no crisis. We're coming up to the COVID period. But throughout this period of 10 years, 2010 say to 2019, throughout this period, huge amounts of money have pumped in. Global debt increased phenomenally. I've got all the facts here, but I'm not going into all that because of lack of time. But so the global debt increased phenomenally. They pumped in money, yet throughout this period of post-Great Recession, or in this period, there's basically lack of growth, stagnation taking place, a huge rise in global debt. And in this period also you see, in fact the entire neoliberal period, you will see one phenomenon: huge profits to the corporate houses, the big billionaire houses, and the drop of income of the masses and working class, farmers, peasantry, even middle class, a section of the middle class, which are not linked to IT. So we see in this period, and the data is here, I'm not presenting the data, I think I'm also taking it, I have anyway written it in various articles. But you will see these two factors: continuous crisis, stagnation, and in this whole neoliberal period, and particularly post the Lehman Brothers, post the Great Recession, you will find a huge differentiation between just the corporate houses. And when I say about the world, it's also about India. The same thing is happening in India. It's just a reflection. The data reflects it both at the world level and at the Indian level. So you find these two factors. What are the two factors? I'm not talking about China now because I haven't really studied that well enough, but the rest of the world. You will find a severe crisis, continuous stagnation, and continuous increase in inequality with the corporate world, the top corporate world. That means I'm not talking even about the top 1%. Top 1% is trickle down compared to the top 1%. I'm talking about the billionaire club, basically. They and their representatives in India have amassed enormous wealth, and the condition of the people have increased, whether it's through price rise, whether it's through wage rates, whether it is through, and that's entire world, Europe, America, and also the third world. So you have to keep this in picture and scenario before we come to this lockdown and the crash after the lockdown and the crisis increasing. Keep this factor in mind that post-World War II, the capitalist economies have been in continuous cycles of crisis, resulting in Great Recession of 2008-9. Also in the neoliberal period, earlier there was a certain amount of welfare, but in the neoliberal period, the gap between the poor and the rich worldwide has increased phenomenally. These factors should be kept in mind when we come to the present state. Prior first quarter of 2020, America, Japan and Europe, the three major economies of the world, went into a severe contraction, varying from 6 to 7%, 8%, unheard of even in the Great Depression. There's not much talked about in the media. There's not much talked about by the leftist economists also, Jayati Ghosh and Vijay Prasad and others. They don't talk about this factor that this entire history of crisis there resulting in this enormous contraction unheard of in the past history post 1930s in this quarter, starting from December actually, 2019, and then came COVID. So then we come to that. And it's coincidence, or it's not a coincidence, it's a plan, whatever, we come to that afterwards. But just at the time of the severe crisis, we find the pandemic declared, a lockout on an international scale. Just in the last earlier quarter, these were huge contractions of the economy that taken place. India has also been in stagnation. Certain figures are India, in fact, the whole world was in severe economic crisis. It was all prior to the pandemic. And then suddenly on mid-March, they declared this unheard of worldwide lockdown, COVID and all that type of stuff. Suddenly unheard of, because never before in history have they adopted such a method, such a drastic measure to control a health problem. So the question is, that question arose to me at that time also that is it really the virus? Was it really an economic factor? Generally, behind any phenomenon, there is economics. And I have been in economics, mostly I have been writing on economics. This question came to the mind, but I was not able to analyze it. I said that why would they want to destroy their own economy? But on the other hand, right in 2016, I read an article from Yale on quoting The Economist, which is the magazine of the capitalist, international capitalist system, where they said this stagnation in the economy is the last straw. This is what they said in their words. Last straw for the capitalist system. They utilize their last possible method of cushioning the economy, that's quantitative easing and interest. Now, if another recession comes, we don't know what's going to happen. They have no other method to deal with it. That the economist said in 2016, which I quoted in an article which I wrote on the same time. So they have also predicted that because they know crises come and things like that. So that also struck me. I've already written about that, I've seen about that, that something more than quantitative easing and low interest rates is probably necessary to bail the economy out of any new crisis that comes. And the new crisis is okay. The stagnation for 10 years, in spite of quantitative easing and low interest rates. And then in spite of all that, you get this huge crash in the economies of America, Europe and Japan. And so it struck me that there's something fishy to the whole thing. That about this virus business. And it needs to be looked into deeper. On the other hand, I couldn't understand why the big corporates or the imperialists or whoever they are out there would want to destroy their own economy by lockdown and things like that. These questions came to the mind and required looking in deeper into the whole issue to try and understand, is it genuinely a virus that came through zoonotic methods, or is it something that was conveniently used by the corporate houses for their own economic interests, given the fact that economists had already said that this is the end, this is the last straw, they have no other method of dealing with a crisis or recession, and something else they didn't say about the alternatives. And then I also read the book written in, surprisingly, in March 2020 only, just a month after the crisis, the pandemic, by the head of the World Economic Forum called COVID-19, the Great Reset. I said that maybe this is the answer to the recession and crisis, the Great Reset that they are planning to counter beside the quantitative easing and interest rates, and it needs to be looked into further and try to understand the causes. So I read his book. It's a horror story. I mean, it's like the Brave New World of 1984 book, but it's a realistic thing, what they're pushing the world towards. It's no fiction like 1984 was a Brave New World by the sun. It is a real, actual, realistic thing, all camouflaged in left language. It's for people's interests, it's for environmental control, it's for this, it's for that. All that is there in his he's head of the Davos. You know what Davos is? World Economic Forum is Davos. It's they who run the world practically together with IMF and these others. And he's saying that before that he wrote a book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2016, which is also in the same thing. So both these things I then studied to try and understand what exactly it's about. It seemed much more than just a virus issue. It seemed much more to that. Then I tried to study it. I'll tell you at least what I've gathered till now about my study and about what the future entails. So first after about 3 months into the lockdown, some facts started coming out of the economy. And of course on the virus it took much longer. Because basically there were views that were presented against the lockdown and virus and they were all portrayed as conspiracy theorists and the right-wing Trumpists propagating that. So one couldn't really see what the fact about the virus was. But certainly about the economy within 3 months, that's by the first quarter after the lockdown from March to June when the data started coming out, it started becoming clear that in these 3 months, the billionaires of the world, that's 2,135 of them, had their wealth had increased by 19% in just 3 months. They had made so much money, while crores of people had been thrown out of, in India what happened to migrants were, India was most ruthless, in fact. Other places were not that ruthless. But even in America, millions of people lost their jobs in these 3 months because of the lockdown. Throughout Europe, China, throughout the world, which meant lakhs and crores of people being thrown out of jobs, even self-employed, even middle class people, the lower middle class, at least those who are not into the IT sector. All of them suffered on a scale never seen before, worldwide. But the billionaires of the world made more money than ever before. And in India, the Sensex companies, 4,000, Sensex means those quoted on the stock exchange, this 4,000 odd companies, they made a profit of their growth in wealth was 171% greater than the quarter before, that's in 2019. Unheard of in the history of India's business houses. So I was seeing this. On the one hand, you see the migrants, they were in India at least, they were not even allowed to travel. They had to walk, and God knows how many thousands must have died. They were not given food. I have data to show that central government allocated pittance of some 5 kilos a month or something. Even that was not distributed for the 2 months. So we see figures about COVID deaths. You will get it on your phone, you will get it on your WhatsApp, you will get it on your newspapers, you will get it day in and day out. But about this suffering that people face in the very first 3 months, there's hardly a word. Some things about the migrants came out because they couldn't hide that. But it was too crude. But even if that was not there, the question was that as far as the economy goes, it was very clear that corporates are gaining and the mass, including the middle classes, are being hit and pushed down in the 3 months. That obviously, I gather there must be an economic cause also, if not the virus. They use the opportunity to benefit them at the cost of the people. But we come to that, the reasons, the economic aspect of that. Then within about 6-8 months, even first, I also said in zoonotic, where everyone said Lancet in the first one. In March itself, Lancet, the top medical journal of the world, had an article signed by 80 virologists saying that those who say that it is not zoonotic, zoonotic means coming from animals to human beings. I never heard of the word before. I researched it. And those who say conspiracy theorists are this, are that, all that was done. I was a bit shocked, Lancet, saying that in the very first month. Why so aggressive? And that too, 80 virologists signing top virologists of the world. I was listening to alternative media, I was listening to videos, there were many scientific theories of other things. But that really raised some questions in my mind, because afterwards it came out that the earlier two viruses, MERS and what were the other ones? SARS, I think. The other two viruses, the intermediary, these viruses are all coming from the bat. The first one, the SARS, I think it was shown that it came from the civet cat. In 4 months, they were able to find the transmission between the original virus through the civet cat in the Wuhan market and to the human being. So they found that intermediary within 4 months. As far as MERS goes, Middle East, what's it called, something virus, that one they found. Why it's called Middle East also? Because within 9 months they found that the intermediary animal for the transmission of the virus from the bat was the camel. But as far as COVID-19 goes, till today they have not found the intermediary animal of transmission. They try and cover up, but already that's at least a year, 9-10 months afterwards, I could also assert, because I also was saying, yeah, zoonotic. Muncie Review was writing articles, the entire left was saying that. So I also said, yeah, maybe so. But then I researched it and I found that this is a reality, whatever the left may be saying. But it certainly doesn't seem to be zoonotic, because they have not yet found the intermediary animal from which it is transferred. So it took a little longer, about a year after this virus, or 9 months or whatever, one top scientific journalist called Wade wrote a 26-page piece where he raised, and he's a top scientist with a lot of credibility apparently. And then I read that article, and he raised the question that about the intermediary animal. He also raised the question of gain of future research. Again, the left are totally quiet about this. Gain of future research is research basically on biological warfare. And this gain of, he brought up this fact of the fact that this gain of future research is being done in America on a big scale with the coronaviruses since the last 30 years to find out, they claim of course it's for the betterment of humanity and things like that. It's obviously biological warfare. And when for a little period it was stopped by, I think, Obama, the Fauci, the head of this virus gang, right from 84, he was the one with the AIDS virus, polio virus, so many other viruses that he was father to. He funded the Wuhan laboratory in China. The entire Wuhan laboratory was funded by, where the leak supposedly took place, was funded by America, by this Fauci character, who is still today the top person in American healthcare. And even he brought out many other facts. You can all look at that Wade article. But one other notable fact was that the top virologist of, she was known as the Bat Lady later, of Wuhan, was trained in virology research in America by the top virologist doctor. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that he raised the question that they've not found the intermediate. There are 1 year has passed now, they've not found it. The others they found in 4 months and 9 months. There's no possible talk about even it. Yet Lancet is declaring in the very first month that this is conspiracy. That made me very strange. That I think Lancet was forced to retract that statement afterwards. But by then, but that was not even in mainstream media. Mainstream media continued to say it's a natural virus, it's that, and that's what's propagated till today. But he raised the question, it could be a leak, a lab leak from Wuhan. It could be accidental, it could be conscious. No one can prove whether it's accidental or conscious, but certainly the lab leak theory became on the agenda so much so that the US government was forced to set forward an inquiry into the origin of the virus. And that's after 1 year, over 1 year. But till then, the entire medical fraternity, Lancet, virologists, all these people were saying it's a natural virus. It's not created with the lab. And the leftists were even more vehement. Frontline carried an interview of what's his name? He writes for Monthly Review also, Monthly Review writer. He wrote an article in the same way, an interview on the front page of Frontline about 8-9 months ago. And Monthly Review, Michael Roberts, I've been going through all the leftists. All of them are in the same way. So actually it becomes very confusing to leftists or to liberals or things like that, because the entire left, a bulk of the left and liberal community are saying exactly what Bill Gates and Fauci are saying. And it is the rightists, some of the rightists of the fascist sector in America who are saying it's hoax and things like that. Of course, they don't give economic reasons. So now, before we were these, after about a year, one was that who has gained and who has lost from the lockdown and the virus. It became more clear. That became clear much later. And there became a question mark on the question of really was the virus a natural thing or was it lab created? And this factor, then I wrote an article in Mainstream called The Origin of the Virus, which I presented many of these facts, and I left it to the reader to decide whether it's three possibilities, whether it's natural, that's zoonotic, or it's lab created. If it's lab created, is it a lab leak or is it a conscious this thing of the virus letting it out? Of course, between the last two is very difficult to decide, but certainly between the first and the second, it is now much more clear, I think. And I don't know why even the left, they don't talk to even mention this gain of future research. I mean, this is what's it called, biological warfare research taking place in labs across US, now in China also. This thing, at least put it on the agenda that there could be a possibility, but no, not a word. They start their article by saying it's zoonotic, in Frontline and Monthly Review and everything. And of course, they link it to the capitalist system. That's true in general. Environmental destruction leads to growth of these zoonotic viruses. That's what they all say. So the capitalist system should be destroyed. That's okay, as far as that goes. That's the general. But the general and the particular vary. In general, it applies to all viruses. The viruses will grow because of environmental destruction. That's true. But is that the case with COVID? Look into the particular also. And that they don't do. But so, anyway, so in this case, these are two aspects. One is that the economy, we have seen now who gains, who loses. There's a question mark on the question of the virus, whether it was natural or lab created. And then I come to the point of how the economy is being reset in the interest of the corporate bourgeoisie and why. Before just explaining the reasons why the corporate houses and how the corporate houses function, I'll also try and explain very briefly. But why the corporate houses adopted this method of lockdown is you have to remember that this whole, one is this history of crisis, right, from post-World War II, and they have reached the end of their tether by 2008, but certainly 2019. And also just remember that all the economists of the world, top economists of the world, had the experience of the Great Depression of 29, where the stock markets crashed. The Great Depression carried on for 10 years, particularly for the first 3-4 years. Its effect was for 10 years, and it resulted in World War II. That was the impact of the Great Depression. And it was only after World War II, post 1945, that the economies recovered. So imagine that. First was the Great Depression, where the stock markets crashed, thousands are unemployed, hunger marches in America, Europe, everywhere. All that stuff was going on. While these hunger marches were going on and people were dying of starvation in Europe and America also, they were not able to come out of the crisis. And then it led to the 1939, the war between the fascists and the allies. In the war, started in 1939, went on to 44-45, huge destruction of labor of productive forces, the war resulted in, and also of people. I mean, the amount of people who were killed in World War II, you can imagine. And all this resulted in finally coming out of the crisis. You can imagine from 29 to 45, this crisis went. This experience was there for all the economists of the world. Now, when the Lehman Brothers crisis came, the memories of the Great Depression, the World War, all those came. World War, of course, is not so much on the agenda today, though the contradiction between between Germany and Germany basically and the allies, Britain and France in those days. Today it's just between America and China, which are contradictory forces. One could say that a similar condition exists for a world war, but there's a difference from there, because America is heavily invested in China and China is heavily invested in America. So their economies are so interlinked. So they had to, the world war was not a solution just now out of the crisis. But the crisis appears to me as deep as it was there, cushioned by the quantitative easing and the resulting debt. So what was the way out? You see, for the corporate houses, who's running the world? It's these, basically it's these billionaire club, or 2000, it's now 2,135 or something. And of those, it is basically the top billionaires who run the show. Now, what's the crisis? What's the basis of a capital crisis in Marxist terms? I mean, one is it lack of investment and profit, the other is lack of markets. You have the capitalist needs markets for the economies to develop. Without the market, to exist, sustain. So they need a market and they need investment. So what happened with this lockdown and pandemic? Investment, they got huge amounts through quantitative easing. I mean, if earlier they were pumping in $1 and $2 trillion, America itself pumped in $3 trillion overnight into the American economy. So did Europe, so did Japan. So they got that investment. And as far as the other aspect of the market, the question of the market went in a way that you see what the lockdown does. You see it very crudely in India, but you see it also in the West. There's much data which I put in my article also on capitalism, that it destroys the small scale and medium sector, SMEs. These small and medium sectors. What in India, Modi calls the formalization of the economy, he started that much earlier with Notbandi, with demonetization, with GST, then a lot of rules for digitization of all transactions, government transactions, and finally lockdown. So this entire scheme of things was being played out in destroyed. Even in America, you will find a lot of the small scale, whatever exists, sectors. So what happens in the by this mechanism, the corporate big houses who run the world, the Kabbalah as they call, they can capture the bankrupt industries at cheap rates. So they will grow in size and they will be able to, and they can also capture their market. So they can sustain their thing at the cost of society, of course, of the small scale sectors of this thing and of the poverty stricken. On the other hand, through digitization and through lockdown, work to home, work from home, these type of things, they can reduce their costs substantially. Just TCS reduce their costs in the first quarter of the lockdown by some millions of dollars, just saving on office space and air conditioning. That's all. TCS, that's the biggest. In fact, the headquarters are here in Chennai. So you can imagine what, and it is played out also. And as far as investment money goes, all the investment that was being, not all, the bulk of the trillions of dollars that were being pumped into the economy went into financial sector. So what happened in the 1930s? In the 1930s, stock markets crashed and there was the. Here what happened in the lockdown? And the huge contraction of the economy and a lot of suffering and all that. Here there was all the contraction of the economy, suffering, when the stock markets are booming. How do you explain that? It is because of the structures that they were involved now. The Sensex has gone up to unbelievable levels of some 60,000 or 60,000. And Nifty has gone up in India, so has the Dow Jones, so has all the stock indexes have gone up. But and as we continues through the lockdown, they have been going up. And corporate wealth, I can give you figures of Bezos and Musk. Adani, everyone knows. Ambani, everyone knows. Poonawalla, the vaccine guy. He's paid billions of dollars, even before this his COVID vaccine came out. He's made. Of course, funded also by Bill Gates. So the thing is that we find that this handful of what I call the cabal that functions and is running the world with the help of Davos, World Economic Forum, IMF, in this case World Health Organization, playing a very active role. Who is the biggest funder worldwide after America? Trump withdrew his fund from WHO. Biden has also given it back. But the second biggest funder after America is Bill Gates to the WHO. The main mafia behind the vaccines. He's invested heavily in vaccines. He was the one who saw that when America said that, okay, we will not put vaccine, this COVID vaccine on patents because of pressure from India, South Africa and other. This Bill Gates who convinced AstraZeneca and all these people, do not remove, and in the G7, they refused to remove patents from the COVID-19 vaccine. When America was, well, at least made a pretense of doing it, removing patents. So he's heavily invested into vaccine. He's one of the main pushers at the front man on the vaccine front, making money, and they're pushing it in a huge way, the vaccine. So we find, actually, when we said that the economist 5 years ago said that this is the end of the capitalist methods. They have no other method to revive the economy except quantitative easing and this thing, and now they use that also. So what they will do in the future recession, we don't know. Future recession came in the first quarter of 2020, but they found this method. So it looks to me very logical that is there, and if you see the entire data for who is gained and who is lost, it's these big corporate houses that have gained huge amounts worldwide and India. It's not just small gains. It's 40-50% in 1 year, which they've never made before. While economies are contracting over the world, while their own economies are contracting, while people are being sent to destitution and being destroyed, they are becoming multi-trillionaires, billionaires and all that. And one more last point. Who are these people? This is also surprisingly the left is, I didn't know about it. I was only researching it. I came to know about it. Who exactly are these people? Who are controlling all this? The Klaus Schwabs and these all are front men. Who is behind the scene? There is what is called, and now it's particularly grown in 2008, post 2008, they were there before, what they call asset management groups. Particularly in the US, they are there. 3 asset management groups controlled $11 trillion. $11 trillion is about 4 to 5 times the US GDP. what does asset management do? Now just try and understand that. They manage the assets of the billionaire basically. So all the billionaire wealth which is reinvested again in the stock market and this and that and all goes up is controlled by these. And another aspect, all the top 40% of the Dow Jones companies and 90% of the S&P, Standard and Poor Index, are controlled by these three companies. Now, who has got the maximum shareholding in Microsoft, in Amazon, in Pfizer, all the pharma companies, even in Pepsi and Coca-Cola? It is these three companies. So it's these three companies and their CEOs, even their CEOs, unknown names, some unknown names, they're the front men again, of these, who are the funds who invest? It's these digital moguls, these billionaires, and it's the real estate and financial like Rockefeller, Rothschild, and these guys. So it is this handful of people functioning through these three assets. This never existed before. In fact, the growth of these asset management groups, the BlackRock, Vanguard, and Switzerland, is post-2008. They existed earlier, but they're huge growth this size and this important. So it's this nexus, and they have with them a whole lot of secret societies. All I put this in my article, research article on capitalism, or trilateral commission, this, that, involving people in India. They have a body called PHFI. Run by one Srinath Reddy. They have all run by the Indian billionaire club, particularly who have their links with Bill Gates and the pharma lobby. PHFI, people's health directly. They are virtually controlling this COVID lockdown, and they are the task forces and everything. It's all behind the scenes. Have you heard of PHFI? I have. I only now researched it, and when some alternate media, then I researched it further and found out the fact who they are and who are their links with the pharma lobby, with Bill Gates types, with Rockefeller Foundation. All of them are functioning and controlling. When we say comprador and things like that, these are the real people. Big players on this are people like those Infosys too. They are huge players linked with the international capital. They are the ones also who made our Aadhaar cards, made all the stuff there. Narayan Modi and other fellow. But there are others also, all of them. And particularly pharma companies are there, represented on PHFI. There are other people on PHFI. So who's dictating? It's those that capital there, linked, organized through the asset management groups and centralized through them. It's virtually centralized. And it's a horrible figure, and people like Klaus Schwab and all that are talking on their behalf. Because he said in his book, he says by 2030, that's the agenda, you will own nothing but you will be happy. That's the slogan. You will own nothing but you will be happy. Means you will be slave of the state, they will give you money, and if you keep quiet, they will hurt you, otherwise they will withdraw the funds and you will face the consequences. That's their slogan. But the question is, you will own nothing means who will own nothing? They will own everything. That he doesn't say. This capital that is there will own everything, actually. That he's quiet about. He doesn't mention a word, but neither does the left also. That's surprising. So the whole question is, this is the horrific future that is before us. So it's time for us to think. And as far as implementing it, right back in 2007, a book was written. I also didn't know about it. That was 2007 by Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. This book, if you read, she was talking about the 2001, the Iraq crisis and the towers that were destroyed, Twin Towers and all that, and how in that atmosphere they introduced neoliberal and aggressive policies against the people in America. Apparently in this book, I've not yet read it, but I've seen parts of it. And exactly what she said there was playing out in India, if you see during the last parliamentary session. While Pegasus and this and that and COVID and this was all being in the atmosphere, and the opposition was boycotting parliament on the basis of Pegasus. bill after bill and act after act was passed on a daily basis, implementing all the neoliberal policies on an aggressive scale. Exactly what she said. Shock, and that was in 2007, before the Lehman Brothers crisis. Shock doctrine, the rise of disaster capital. Exactly, you see these things being played out in India as part of the international agenda. So, to summarize, conclude finally, now conference, that see, it's I have data to back what I have said. It's all here, but and I'm putting it. I already have it in an article in mainstream for corona capitalism. I've divided that. But it's a hard. It's not just prediction. We are not predicting like conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists, if you hear them, actually they spoil their game. They say, "Oh, this is a Marxist plot to take over the world, dictatorship, world dictatorship." Yes, it's world dictatorship for a reason. They never give the reason. So that's why it's easily dismissed. So what the opposition to the coronavirus say from the right is, and what the supporters say, two sides of the same coin, because actually it helps diffuse the city. Even though those who are opposing in a very sort of ridiculous way. So people can, those who are supporting, who are really rabid COVID supporters and lockdown supporters and things like that, you can easily dismiss the opposition because they have no logic, they have no reason. They just say it's coming a fascist state. Yes, the fascist state is coming. To impose this, they have to suppress ruthlessly any sort of opposition. And they've started. You see it in India being played out. India is actually a major playground for all this. Because not only are we a big laboratory for all the virus anti-vaccine, the vaccine tests, we are a big laboratory, we are a big experiment through this thing, and also we are a big market for all this, and we have a very pliant ruling class, which implements it as we saw in the last parliament. So it's a horrific future that's coming. So the question is, it's for the left, for the liberals, for the Democrats, such people to actually mobilize. If they are taken in by the Fauci Bill Gates agenda and are not making people aware of what is coming, what's on the card, then how the world and how the people in India, by the time it hits us, it's already hitting us. We are already shut under house arrest, virtually the whole population of the world in the name of COVID. People are, at least the middle class, very nervous about everything. They are not really self out. Section 144 is everywhere. You can't demonstrate. The courts are not functioning. Now they started, but the courts are not functioning. But the police is overactive in the name of stopping masks and things like that. So it's virtually already there, a sort of fascist agenda. It's not just Hindutva. People only the left only see Hindutva. The progressive only see Hindutva. They don't see what is being played out right in our own houses, in our own families, in our own environment. If that's not fascist, what is it? It's a stepping stone to just the immense horrors that are going to come. Already in India, 30 crore people have been thrown out from the middle classes into poverty. From 99 crores or something, it's gone down to 66 crores. Middle classes, forget the poor, in this lockdown period. But we don't see it, we don't realize it. I mean, the media completely covers it up. There's no media playing it out. The opposition parties on this issue are quiet. Most of them are all probably linked somewhere with the PHFI and the PH and God knows what. The thousands of illicit relations between all these people and these foreign capital. So the whole question is that the entire ruling elite and the media and everything is playing out, and so the people, and the left is quiet. Left is in fact virtually supportive. Internationally and in India, I don't see much of the left. There is a section that is speaking out, not the major groups. So who is going to take up this agenda? That is the danger, and it's moving at a very fast rate. This whole horrific future that is predicted, which is said by Klaus Schwab in his books and all that you will have this thing, fourth industrial revolution is defined as by the merging of what's it called that? Not internet. Internet is the third. He said that higher technology, what's it called that like automatically
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence merged with biotechnology, merged with your body. He says in so many words, the meaning of human will change. What is to be human will change. He says like that in his words. Because they will implant things and do God knows what they want to do. So the whole question is it's a horrific future, it's not science fiction. It's a real thing that is coming up. It will probably be there in the West, out there, here. People will just die like you, they already probably died. There's no record of how many were killed. Died of hunger, starvation. Even the psychological impact of isolation is killing so many. Or debilitating so many, if not killing them. It's in every sphere. And once your immune system is destroyed, your mental ability to think independently, there's fear all around. And with fear you can't think your whole ability. Fear kills your immunity also, it has a psychological effect on your immunity. It also has an impact on your ability to analyze logically. And this fear psychosis is so widespread, particularly in middle class. I see in Bombay. In Mumbai out there, the entire middle class is all scared and this, they won't step out of their house with masks and this and all their vaccines and all. They won't talk to you if you are not vaccinated. But I go to the slums, not one person is wearing masks, not one, they're all talking about the vaccines and things like that. It's a class divide, clear-cut class divide, you can see. And the Oxford report has said as much. The latest Oxford report said 11 people are dying of hunger every minute. 16,000 per day, far more than coal. I mean, Oxfam is their body, and they are also, in a way, limiting it. But this is just the starting point. Unless the people are organized to fight, first realize what is coming, and therefore prepare accordingly. Don't prepare stupidly and get just washed out. You have to prepare accordingly. And the whole question is, and that's why I hail the farmer struggle, because it's hit the Great Reset dictator. Forget about the Indian this thing and Ambani and Adani. Yes, they are the agents out here. But it is hit the Great Reset dictator because the farm laws are part of the privatization that these people are demanding. It's just part of it, an important part of it, taking over the food chain. That's what they plan. That is they did. They also showed that lakhs could gather without getting COVID. They, in fact, people died more of sunshine and cold and things like that. So, in many ways, and they showed that various ideologies, people are not could unite against an enemy. So, the whole question is that we should at least realize the dangers coming, and of course, as social activists, one has to think how we get prepared.
And the likely translation as well. Thanks a lot for that. I have two questions or assumptions. First one is about fascism per se. You mentioned that neoliberalism itself is fascism in a process. Neoliberalism itself is a fascism in process. You mentioned in your speech actually that. So, should we discard the notion that we have to fight specifically against Hindutva altogether? That is my first question. Second one is my assumption actually. This is not a question per se. Let me put forward an assumption. If we are right. Instead of going for lab, leak theory, etc., why can't we think that delaying lockdowns might have aggravated the problem instead of going for lab thing. That's just an assumption or a kind of a question. So these are the two things I would like to put forward.
Will you translate?
Comment.
On the first question on neoliberalism, actually what I actually meant was that neoliberalism by its definition is repressive, oppressive, as opposed to welfare state. It's not that welfare state was not exploitative, but it had a softening effect in its implementation. Neoliberalism is crude and repressive, so it's a different thing, and actually the level of repression will depend on the extent of exploitation and development, and so that will develop further. I'm not going into definitions of fascism, whether they carry a type or in that type. Basically, the oppressive state will become more and more oppressive with this thing. And as far as the fight against Hindutva, we have to see, you take India how it's played out. There are two sides of the same. I mean, there's like two horses of a chariot running. Neoliberalism started to be introduced in the world and in India also about mid-80s. Hindutva also started at the same time. It's not a coincidence. The opening of the Babri Masjid loved by Rajiv Gandhi and all the promotion of on the TV of the Ramayana, which made practically the whole country into curfew, watching that when the TVs were first introduced, was about 83, 84. Exactly the same time as the neoliberal. So these are two things that go parallel: the neoliberal economy and the growth of Hindutva. And as neoliberalism becomes more aggressive, it needs more of Hindutva. And that's we see playing out here. We see the present dispensation will in fact be more aggressive on Hindutva, more aggressive on introducing virtually the last budget shows complete privatized sell-out of everything. It's an extreme position. You can take that under the cover of. So the two go hand in glove. That's what we should see. And all the policies that are being pushed just now in this lockdown period is really aggressive on the neoliberal front. The shock doctrine. And if we just look at the last session of Parliament, as far as the landing theory and all that, see, as Marxists, as materialists, something we try to look for the facts. If we realize what the facts are, then we will be able to counter it. So it's not that we're looking for anything, we're looking for the truth. And basically, if these people are trying to cover up the truth by their zoonotic theories and all that, and their absurd this thing, it's for us to try and expose. I mean, it's the mainstream agenda, mainstream media is virtually taking lives today. Even ordinary people find it difficult to believe what's in the mainstream media, including the TV. On the TV. I don't know what you're having TV because locally, most of TV is controlled internationally and by the big people, and those things. So I have the newspapers also. You have the alternative media now coming up, it gives some truth, facts. But basically, search for truth and facts is the starting point for change. So, if it's lacking, the great big thing on its face, why support the cover-up? Of course, you can say also, as you said, that this cabal, that Asim, all these people have used the lockdown to this benefit. No doubt. That also is an argument which doesn't divert much from what I have said. It's true. You can't say that. But if the reality is something different, let's look at its face. Do not cover up what all these people are trying to do. And what irritates me more is that the bulk of the left is falling line. 2 weeks back, there was a huge meeting in Brussels of the entire European Marxists, that's the leftist Marxists, including the Social Democrats, the Greens, and all the progressives. You just look at their declaration. There's not a word on the fears coming in. On COVID, they only talk about universal vaccination and removal of vehicles. That's as far as they go. But that's what they want also. Universal vaccine means selling their vaccine, more booster dose and more booster dose and more booster dose. Now this is not enough, so you need more booster doses. So, not a word on what the fear. Actually, it's that platform that should have taken a stand on the international agenda to prepare the people. It's all emanating from there, where they are, but they're not seeing it. And this was a platform, it's called the Fifth World Declaration. You can see it on the internet, I think it's all over. And they're not a word preparing the masses of the world for what is to come. In fact, it's playing to their agenda. So, what you say is, means it need not be, I'm not saying that it will change the arguments very much. If we argue as you have argued, that they've used this situation. But I feel that it's better to know the reality and expose the lies and hypocrisies that have been pushed by the mainstream and probably and pharma companies and everyone else. And the governments, the agents of the government. See, the asset management, it's not the question of ancient imperialism has ended and imperialism and revolution. These are just words. Imperialism has existed since Lenin wrote that book, Imperialism, the higher stage of capitalism. So, but the socialism has come in Soviet Union. No, after that, basically, it's only come in China. Actually, maybe if you say Cuba or some other country, small country. So, where's the revolution of the agenda? It's okay, it's a general thesis that, and that it automatically connects itself. I don't think anyone in Marxist has said that. Unless you hit it, it will not fall. They will repress, that's the demand. They've gone through various cycles, various this thing, and now they've reached their peak. And they are also giving this alternative. It's not that they've not given an alternative. And they're packaging the alternative as it's a people's alternative. It's a pro-environmental alternative. If you read Strauss or see his things on review and things like that, which he said, he's packaging this, and the right wing is saying it's a Marxist agenda put forward by, and people using people even further by saying that. So the whole thing is that, no, the system, capitalist system, it will not, cannot stabilize itself because it's an internal fundamental contradiction that reaches its peak. I mean, when Marx analyzed capital as basically the cycles and the crises inbuilt within the economy, has magnified tenfold in the era of imperialism. And imperialism started when Lenin wrote the book. Imperialism, I mean, about that time. Higher stage of that's where 1917, 18, when did he write that? It's now over a century after that. With imperialism also changes form in various ways, financialization of capital. There's some books by, in fact, people and all that, which needs to be studied. The present structure of imperialism and its nature. But as you go towards more financialization, it becomes more and more hollowing between and crisis ridden, because financialization means making surplus through speculative capital and by circulation of money, not by extracting of surplus value from labor. So they can dispense with labor to quite an extent and still make their profit, which they're doing in the lockdown. Labor is completely thrown out, completely crushed, but they are making their money on the stock exchange and the rising wealth and things like that by pushing in the money of the government, the finances of the government. But this is, that is only increasing the debt. The debt today, the global debt, is something like 350% the global GDP. It's a huge amount. How that pays out, but I still have to try and research it. I have not done that. But these are all making the whole economy even more and more fragile. So if a farmers' movement can oppose the whole thing, not consciously as opposing the Great Reset, but de facto they've done it in order for their own interests. The society at large can do it if they're conscious of it. That's what the left and liberal sections to do, Democrats to do, basically. They're not doing that. That's the problem. That's the greatest danger.